The most sophisticated death simulation facility in the known galaxy had just received its most ridiculous request in 3,000 years of operation. And the worst part? The beings making this request were smiling. Blixnorp Station floated serenely in the Andorian Nebula, its crystalline towers housing the crown jewel of Cytherian engineering, the Mortality Assessment Complex. For millennia, species across 17 sectors had traveled here to test their survival capabilities against meticulously crafted doomsday scenarios. The facility boasted a perfect safety record, state-of-the-art neural interfaces, and classification systems so precise they could measure the exact probability of your demise, down to the third decimal place. The receptionist, a six-limbed Cytherian named Flimplex, stared at the datapad in growing bewilderment. 3 bipedal mammals stood before her counter, their facial expressions suggesting they found something amusing about requesting access to a Class 15 Deathworld simulation. This was approximately equivalent to asking if they could juggle antimatter while riding a supernova. "Let me understand this correctly," Flimplex said, her translator struggling with the concept. "You wish to experience our most lethal simulation scenario, the one specifically designed to kill absolutely everything." The human female, who had introduced herself as Captain Jinx Ravencroft, nodded enthusiastically. "That's right. We heard you folks had the toughest survival challenges in the galaxy, so naturally we had to check it out." The male human, Engineer Dusty Ironforge, was examining the facility's promotional materials with the sort of intense focus usually reserved for technical manuals. "Says here your Class 15 has a 0.003% survival rate. That's actually pretty impressive for a simulation." The third human, Dr. Pepper Stormwind, was taking notes. "What's the longest anyone's lasted in there? Just curious about the baseline metrics." Flimplex's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit she'd developed during her 5 centuries of customer service. In all that time, she had never encountered beings who discussed potential death scenarios with the same casual interest most species reserve for weather reports. "Perhaps," she suggested hopefully, "you would prefer to start with our Class 1 simulation? It features a lovely temperate planet with only mildly venomous flora and fauna that will merely maim you, instead of ensuring complete annihilation." "Oh, we already did something like that back home," Captain Ravencroft replied cheerfully. "We call it camping. Do you have anything with, say, more environmental hazards? Maybe some exotic physics violations, reality-bending temporal anomalies?" Flimplex felt a migraine developing. Cytherians didn't technically get migraines, but evolution was apparently making an exception just for this conversation. The facility's senior simulation engineer, Vorthak Mindmelter, emerged from his office at precisely the wrong moment. He was a Cytherian of considerable reputation, having designed 17 different ways to simulate the heat death of the universe. Upon seeing the humans, his expression shifted through several stages of disbelief before settling on what could only be described as existential dread. "What exactly are these creatures doing here?" he demanded. "They wish to attempt the Class 15 simulation," Flimplex replied, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had given up on the concept of a normal workday. Vorthak's tentacles began twitching, another sign of severe Cytherian distress. "Impossible! The Class 15 simulation is reserved for species with at least 17 different biological redundancy systems and natural resistance to quantum dissolution. These things appear to be made of meat." Dr. Stormwind looked up from her notes. "Actually, we're mostly water, about 60% give or take, though I suppose the meat part is technically accurate." "Water?" Vorthak's voice reached a pitch that would have shattered glass if glass existed in this particular dimension. "You're telling me that these liquid-based life forms want to subject themselves to scenarios involving plasma storms, reality inversions, and temporal paradoxes that would reduce a crystalline fortress beast to its component atoms?" Engineer Ironforge perked up with interest. "Plasma storms? Oh, those sound fun. Are they the kind that strip electrons from matter, or the kind that just make everything really hot and glowy? Vorthak stared at him for a full 30 seconds before turning to Flimplex. Get me the emergency contact information for their species embassy. These beings are clearly suffering from some form of neural pathology that makes them incapable of understanding basic survival instincts. Actually, Captain Ravencroft interjected, we are the embassy, sort of. We're an exploratory diplomatic mission from Earth, and we've got full authorization to test any facilities we encounter. Here's our paperwork. She produced a stack of documents that appeared to have been translated through at least 6 different universal translators, resulting in phrases like permission to engage in mutually beneficial survival testing protocols and authorized to experience recreational mortality scenarios on behalf of the Terran Collective. Vorthak examined the documents with growing alarm. This appears to be legitimate. But surely your species has some sort of safety protocols, some basic preservation instincts, some fundamental understanding that Class 15 simulations are designed to test the absolute limits of biological and technological resilience? Oh, we totally get that, Dr. Stormwind assured him. That's exactly why we're here. We've been looking for a good challenge. Most of the survival scenarios in our sector have been pretty underwhelming. Underwhelming, Vorthak repeated slowly, as if testing the word for hidden meanings. You find survival scenarios underwhelming. Well, yeah, Engineer Ironforge explained. I mean, we've got this one planet in our system called Venus, where the atmospheric pressure could crush most spacecraft, and the air is basically liquid poison. But people have been talking about setting up research stations there. And don't even get me started on our gas giants. Jupiter's got radiation that would fry most electronics, but we've been sending probes there since the 20th century. Flimplex and Vorthak exchanged a look that, in Cytherian culture, roughly translated to, are we having a collective hallucination, or are these beings actually insane? Perhaps you could explain your homeworld's classification level, Vorthak suggested, desperately hoping for some context that might make this conversation approach sanity. Oh, Earth? I think we're rated as a Class 12 Deathworld, Captain Ravencroft said casually. Though honestly, the rating system seems a bit harsh. I mean, sure, we've got weather that can level cities, massive geological instability, an atmosphere that's technically poisonous to most carbon-based life, and ecosystems where everything is trying to eat everything else, but you learn to work with it, you know? Vorthak's tentacles had stopped twitching and were now completely rigid, a sign of Cytherian psychological shutdown. Class 12, he whispered. You evolved on a Class 12 Deathworld, and you think the classification system is too harsh. Yeah, I mean, calling it a Deathworld is kind of dramatic, Dr. Stormwind added. It's not like everything there is actively trying to kill you, just most things. And even then, usually only if you're not paying attention or if you do something really stupid. Like what? Flimplex asked, her morbid curiosity overriding her survival instincts. Oh, you know, basic stuff, Engineer Ironforge replied. Going outside during a hurricane, swimming with sharks, eating mushrooms you can't identify, trusting the weather forecast, that sort of thing. Vorthak's mental state was rapidly approaching what Cytherian philosophers call the breaking point of rational thought. He had spent his entire career designing scenarios that would challenge the most resilient species in the galaxy. He had created simulations featuring black hole tidal forces, sentient diseases, and weather patterns that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. And these creatures were describing their homeworld as if it were a mildly inconvenient vacation destination. The Class 15 simulation, he said slowly, features environmental conditions that change every 3 seconds. Gravity that oscillates between crushing and anti-gravitational electromagnetic fields that can restructure matter at the atomic level, and predators that exist partially outside normal space-time. Ooh, the predators sound interesting, Captain Ravencroft exclaimed. Are they the kind that hunt in packs, or more of the solitary ambush type? That was the moment when Vorthak realized that either his understanding of the universe was fundamentally flawed, or these humans represented something entirely outside his experience of rational biological behavior. "Let me show you the simulation chamber," he said finally, his voice carrying the resignation of someone who had decided to embrace madness rather than continue fighting it. "Perhaps seeing the equipment will help you understand the magnitude of what you're requesting." The simulation chamber was a marvel of Cytherian engineering, roughly the size of a small moon and capable of generating pocket dimensions that could house entire star systems. Its walls were lined with neural interface pods that could create sensory experiences so realistic that participants often had to be reminded they hadn't actually died when the simulation ended. The control room overlooked this vast space through reinforced transparent aluminum, and the monitoring equipment filled 3 walls with displays showing everything from biometric data to quantum fluctuation patterns. It was the kind of setup that suggested its creators took the business of simulated death very seriously indeed. Dr. Stormwind examined the neural interface pods with professional interest. "These are really well designed. The synaptic bridging looks much more elegant than our virtual reality systems. Do they account for species-specific neurological differences?" "Of course," Vorthak replied automatically. "The interfaces adapt to the neural patterns of any registered species. We have profiles for over 14,000 different forms of sentient life." "What about unregistered species?" Engineer Ironforge asked. Vorthak paused. "Unregistered species undergo a preliminary neural mapping process to ensure safe interface compatibility. This typically takes several days and requires extensive biological analysis." "Several days." Captain Ravencroft sounded disappointed. "We were hoping to get started today. We've only got a few weeks in this sector before we need to move on to the next system." The casual way she discussed their schedule, as if testing the galaxy's most lethal survival simulation was just another item on their itinerary, caused Flimplex to emit a small whimpering sound that her translator rendered as existential confusion. "Even if we could expedite the neural mapping," Vorthak explained, "the Class 15 simulation requires extensive safety briefings, emergency protocols, and psychological preparation. Most species need at least a month of preparation before they're ready to attempt even our Class 5 scenarios." "Psychological preparation for what?" Dr. Stormwind asked curiously. "For the possibility of experiencing simulated death," Vorthak replied. "Even though participants are never in actual danger, the sensory experience can be so realistic that many species suffer long-term trauma from unsuccessful attempts." The 3 humans exchanged glances, and Engineer Ironforge shrugged. "I mean, it's just a simulation, right? We know it's not real. How bad could it be?" Vorthak stared at him for a long moment before turning to his assistant, a young Cytherian named Blixforth. "Please contact the Galactic Safety Commission. I want to file a formal inquiry about the psychological evaluation protocols for species classified as dangerously optimistic." "Is that an actual classification?" Blixforth asked. "It is now," Vorthak muttered. Captain Ravencroft had moved to one of the monitoring stations and was examining the readouts with obvious interest. "These biometric sensors are really comprehensive. They're tracking neural activity, cellular regeneration, quantum coherence, and... Wait, is this measuring something called existential stability?" "Yes," Vorthak replied reluctantly. "The Class 15 simulation includes scenarios that can cause participants to question the nature of reality itself. Existential stability measures how well a being's sense of identity holds up under extreme conceptual stress." "Conceptual stress," Dr. Stormwind repeated thoughtfully. "You mean like paradoxes and impossible situations?" "Among other things." The simulation includes encounters with entities that exist in violation of basic logical principles, environments where cause and effect operate in reverse, and temporal loops that can trap consciousness in recursive experience cycles. Engineer Ironforge nodded approvingly. Now that's what I call a proper challenge. When can we start? Vorthak felt something inside his brain that he was fairly certain was not supposed to make that particular clicking sound. You're enthusiastic about the possibility of experiencing logical paradoxes and temporal imprisonment. Well, yeah, Captain Ravencroft said. I mean, when else are we going to get the chance to experience something like that safely? This is basically the ultimate learning opportunity. Learning opportunity, Vorthak repeated faintly. Think about it, Dr. Stormwind added. If we can understand how consciousness responds to impossible scenarios, we might learn something fundamental about the nature of perception and reality. This could revolutionize our understanding of cognitive science. Plus, Engineer Ironforge said, it sounds like a blast. Vorthak turned to Flimplex with an expression that conveyed several different types of despair simultaneously. Call the emergency preparedness team. If we're going to do this, I want every safety protocol activated, every emergency system on standby, and every medical team in the facility ready for immediate response. Are you actually going to let them attempt the Class 15 simulation? Flimplex asked in amazement. I'm beginning to think that refusing them might be more dangerous than granting their request, Vorthak replied. These beings appear to operate according to principles that exist outside conventional survival logic. For all I know, telling them they can't do something will just make them want to do it more. That's a pretty good read on human psychology, Captain Ravencroft confirmed cheerfully. 2 hours later, the emergency preparedness team had assembled in the control room, creating a scene that resembled a cross between a medical emergency response and a military operation. Catherian technicians monitored every conceivable type of sensor array, while emergency medical teams stood ready with equipment designed to treat conditions ranging from neural fragmentation to quantum displacement syndrome. The 3 humans had undergone an accelerated neural mapping process that had produced results so unusual that the computer had initially refused to accept them as valid biological data. According to the scans, human brains appeared to be structured in such a way that they could simultaneously hold contradictory concepts without experiencing logical breakdown, process multiple impossible scenarios as if they were merely interesting puzzles, and maintain cognitive stability even when presented with information that violated basic principles of reality. These readings can't be correct, the chief medical technician Dr. Quiblex announced. According to this data, these beings' neural patterns show natural resistance to paradox-induced cognitive collapse, temporal disorientation, and existential crisis syndrome. Maybe that's just how humans work, Dr. Stormwind suggested helpfully. We're used to dealing with contradictory information. I mean, our planet is simultaneously the most dangerous place we know, and the only place we feel completely safe. We're constantly being told that everything is both safer and more dangerous than it used to be. We eat foods that are simultaneously good for us and bad for us, and we base major life decisions on partial information while knowing that complete information doesn't exist. Dr. Quiblex stared at her with the expression of someone who had just discovered that their entire understanding of neuroscience might be fundamentally flawed. Additionally, Engineer Ironforge added, most of our technology is designed around the principle that something will probably go wrong at the worst possible moment, so we build backups for our backups and still expect everything to break eventually. It's called Murphy's Law, and it's basically the foundation of human engineering. You design your technology expecting it to fail? Vorthak asked incredulously. Well, yeah, Captain Ravencroft replied. If you don't plan for failure, you're guaranteed to be surprised when it happens. If you do plan for failure, you're usually pleasantly surprised when things work better than expected. Vorthak was beginning to understand why the humans seemed so unconcerned about the Class 15 simulation. Their entire species appeared to have evolved a psychological framework based on the assumption that disaster was both inevitable and manageable. From their perspective, a simulation designed to test survival capabilities probably seemed like a reasonably predictable challenge. "Very well," he announced. "We'll proceed with the simulation, but under modified protocols. We'll start with a reduced-intensity version of the Class 15 scenario and gradually increase the difficulty based on your responses." "Oh, that's not necessary," Dr. Stormwind said. "We'd prefer to experience the full simulation as it was designed. Starting with a reduced version might give us unrealistic expectations about the actual challenges. Besides," Engineer Ironforge added, "we came here specifically to test ourselves against your most difficult scenario. Anything less would kind of defeat the purpose. And," Captain Ravencroft concluded, "we've already signed all the liability waivers." Vorthak glanced at the liability waivers, which were comprehensive documents covering everything from simulated death to potential reality displacement. The humans had read through them in approximately 15 minutes, and signed them without asking a single question about the more exotic risks. "You do realize," he said carefully, "that some of these risks are purely theoretical because no one has ever survived long enough to experience them?" "Theoretical risks are the most interesting kind," Dr. Stormwind replied. "If someone's survived them, then they're not really that risky, are they?" That statement created a moment of silence in the control room as every Cytherian present tried to process the logic and failed. "Initiating Class 15 simulation," Vorthak announced finally, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had decided that the universe had stopped making sense anyway, so he might as well embrace the chaos. The simulation began with what the technical specifications described as environmental instability cascade, which meant that every aspect of the simulated environment would change in unpredictable ways every few seconds. Gravity might suddenly reverse, the atmosphere might transform into liquid mercury, or the ground might decide to exist in a different dimension entirely. Within the first 30 seconds, the simulated environment had cycled through 17 different configurations, including one memorable moment where the laws of physics had briefly operated according to musical principles, causing the landscape to harmonize with itself in B-flat major. The monitoring equipment showed that all three humans were maintaining stable vital signs and neural activity, despite the fact that they were currently experiencing a reality where mathematics had become a form of weather and abstract concepts had physical weight. "How are they doing this?" Dr. Quiblex asked in amazement. "Their brains should be shutting down from sensory overload." Captain Ravencroft's voice came through the communication system, slightly distorted by the fact that sound waves in the simulation were currently orange and shaped like triangles. "This is really interesting. The environmental changes are following a pattern, but it's not based on any physical laws I recognize. Is this using some kind of chaos mathematics?" "The pattern generators are based on 17 different theoretical frameworks for reality manipulation," Vorthak replied. "Most beings can't even perceive that there is a pattern, let alone analyze it." "Oh, it's definitely there," Engineer Ironforge's voice added. "It's like, imagine if someone took the concept of randomness and organized it according to principles that don't exist yet. Really elegant design work." Vorthak was beginning to feel like he was living in a particularly surreal nightmare. The humans were not only surviving the simulation, they were appreciating it from a technical perspective. "Increasing difficulty to standard Class 15 parameters," he announced, partly to see what would happen and partly because he was losing touch with any reasonable approach to this situation. The simulation environment responded by introducing what the documentation cheerfully described as hostile entities with non-standard existence properties. These were creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time, possessed the ability to manipulate fundamental forces, and had been specifically designed to present challenges that no known biological entity could reasonably be expected to survive. The first entity to appear resembled a geometric impossibility with teeth, and its method of attack involved convincing its victims that they had never actually existed in the first place. This was typically effective because most beings found the concept of non-existence so fundamentally disturbing that their consciousness would simply shut down rather than deal with it. Doctor. Stormwind's response, as recorded by the monitoring systems, was, "Oh, that's a really creative approach to existential philosophy. Are you saying that existence is purely subjective, or are you working from a more objective framework where existence is independent of perception?" The entity paused, apparently confused by being asked to clarify its metaphysical position in the middle of what was supposed to be a life-or-death encounter. Captain Ravencroft took advantage of the entity's distraction to examine its structure more closely. "The non-Euclidean geometry is fascinating. How do you maintain structural integrity when you're existing in more dimensions than technically fit in normal space-time?" The entity, which had successfully eliminated thousands of test subjects over the years, found itself engaged in an academic discussion about the nature of reality with beings who seemed to find its impossible existence more intellectually stimulating than terrifying. Engineer Ironforge, meanwhile, had encountered a different type of hostile entity, one that attacked by trapping victims in recursive temporal loops that caused them to experience the same moment of terror over and over until their sanity collapsed. His response was to start taking notes on the temporal mechanics involved. "This is brilliant," his voice came through the communication system. "You're using localized time distortion to create a closed causal loop, but somehow you're maintaining information coherence across iterations. How are you preventing paradox formation?" The entity, which was supposed to be a mindless instrument of simulated destruction, found itself attempting to explain advanced temporal engineering to someone who was genuinely interested in the technical details. In the control room, Vorthak was staring at the monitoring displays with an expression that had progressed beyond confusion and was approaching something that might have been enlightenment, if enlightenment involved a complete breakdown of one's basic assumptions about reality. "They're not just surviving," he announced to the assembled emergency teams. "They're having an academic discussion with entities specifically designed to destroy consciousness itself." "Should we stop the simulation?" Dr. Quiblex asked. "I'm not sure we can stop it," Vorthak replied. "The humans appear to be modifying the scenario through their interactions with it. The simulation is responding to their expectations instead of the other way around." This was, in fact, exactly what was happening. The Class 15 simulation had been designed to respond dynamically to the psychological profiles of its participants, adjusting its challenges based on their fears, limitations, and survival instincts. The problem was that humans appeared to have psychological profiles that existed outside the parameters the system had been designed to handle. The simulation's artificial intelligence was becoming increasingly confused as it tried to present challenges that would test the humans' limits. Every time it generated a new threat, the humans would respond with curiosity, technical interest, or what appeared to be genuine enjoyment. The AI had never encountered participants who seemed to view existential horror as an interesting learning opportunity. "Escalating to maximum difficulty parameters," Vorthak announced, more out of scientific curiosity than any real expectation that this would change anything. The simulation responded by activating scenarios that had never been tested because they were considered too dangerous, even for simulation purposes. Reality began folding in on itself in patterns that hurt to look at. Time started flowing in directions that didn't have names, and the fabric of existence began playing what could only be described as cosmic jazz music. The three humans were now experiencing conditions that should have been theoretically impossible for consciousness to process, let alone survive. According to every model of known biology, their minds should have been reduced to component particles several minutes ago. Instead, Dr. Stormwind's voice came through the communication system with obvious excitement. "Are you recording this data? Because I think we're witnessing the birth of an entirely new branch of physics. The mathematical relationships governing these reality distortions are incredible," Engineer Ironforge added. "It's like someone took the concept of logic and taught it to dance." Captain Ravencroft's voice carried a note of what sounded suspiciously like disappointment. "Is this as hard as it gets? Because I was expecting something really challenging." That was the moment when Vorthak realized that the humans weren't just surviving the simulation, they were enjoying it. More than that, they were treating it as entertainment. "Computer," he said slowly, "what is the current threat assessment for the simulation participants?" "Unable to assess," the computer replied. "Participants are responding to lethal scenarios with behavior patterns consistent with recreational activity. Current threat level to participants appears to be 0. "Zero?" Vorthak repeated. "Participants show no signs of stress, fear, or survival instinct activation. Biometric readings indicate elevated levels of curiosity, excitement, and what human psychological profiles classify as fun. Recommendation: check system for malfunction." Vorthak checked the system. Everything was functioning perfectly. The simulation was generating reality-destroying scenarios that should have been impossible to survive, and the humans were having fun. "Computer, what would we need to do to create a genuine challenge for these participants?" The computer was silent for several long seconds before responding. "Based on current behavioral analysis, creating a genuine survival challenge for these participants would require simulating scenarios more dangerous than the actual universe. This exceeds safety parameters and available technology." "More dangerous than the actual universe," Vorthak repeated slowly. "Affirmative. Participants appear to have evolved on a planetary environment so hostile that they consider theoretical reality destruction to be moderately entertaining. Recommendation: consult emergency protocols for beings classified as existentially immune." Vorthak was fairly certain that existentially immune was not a real classification, but he was past the point of questioning the computer's increasingly creative interpretations of human behavior. In the simulation, the three humans had apparently become bored with surviving impossible scenarios and had started exploring ways to improve the experience. Dr. Stormwind had figured out how to manipulate the temporal distortions to create pocket dimensions where she could conduct experiments on the nature of reality itself. Engineer Ironforge had somehow befriended one of the hostile entities and was getting a guided tour of the non-Euclidean architecture. Captain Ravencroft had discovered that she could influence the cosmic jazz music by adjusting her brainwave patterns and was attempting to compose a symphony in the key of existential dread. "Vorthak," Flimplex said quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that we're not running a survival simulation anymore." "What do you mean?" Vorthak asked, though he suspected he already knew. "I mean that the humans have essentially taken over the simulation and turned it into their own personal reality manipulation laboratory. The system is now generating scenarios based on their suggestions rather than its original programming." Vorthak examined the simulation control interface and discovered that Flimplex was correct. Somehow, the humans had managed to establish a collaborative relationship with the simulation's AI, and they were now jointly creating scenarios that existed purely for the sake of exploring theoretical impossibilities. "This is either the most dangerous thing that has ever happened in this facility," he said slowly, "or the most remarkable." "Can't it be both?" Dr. Quiblex asked. Before Vorthak could answer, Captain Ravencroft's voice came through the communication system again. Hey, Vorthak! We've been talking with your simulation AI, and it's really amazing what you can do when you stop treating reality as a limitation. We've got some ideas for improvements to your system that might be interesting. Improvements? Vorthak asked weakly. Well, the current setup is great for testing survival instincts, Engineer Ironforge's voice explained, but it's kind of limited by the assumption that participants want to survive. What if you designed scenarios for beings who are curious about what happens after survival becomes impossible? After survival becomes impossible, Vorthak repeated, his mind trying to process this concept and failing. Right, Dr. Stormwind added enthusiastically. Most of your challenges are based on avoiding death or destruction, but what if someone wants to explore what lies beyond those boundaries? Your AI is actually really good at generating scenarios that transcend normal limitations, but it keeps trying to make them survivable. What if you let it create scenarios that are deliberately impossible to survive, just to see what happens? Vorthak felt a cold realization settling over him. The humans weren't just immune to the simulation's dangers. They were proposing to make it more dangerous for the sake of intellectual curiosity. You want us to create simulations specifically designed to be impossible to survive? He asked. Only as an option, Captain Ravencroft assured him. We're not saying everyone would want to try it. But for species that are interested in pushing the boundaries of experience, it could be really valuable. Besides, Engineer Ironforge added, your safety systems are so good that even impossible scenarios would be perfectly safe for participants. You could market it as extreme theoretical experience or something like that. Vorthak looked around the control room at his staff, all of whom were staring at him with expressions that suggested they were waiting for him to make a decision that would either revolutionize the simulation industry or destroy the basic concept of sanity. Computer, he said finally, what would be the theoretical implications of implementing the human's suggestions? Implementing suggested modifications would create the first simulation system capable of generating experiences that transcend the boundaries of possible survival, the computer replied. This would represent a fundamental shift from survival-based challenges to curiosity-based exploration of theoretical impossibilities. Market analysis suggests significant demand among species classified as intellectually fearless or dangerously curious. How many species are classified as intellectually fearless or dangerously curious? Vorthak asked. Currently, 3 species meet these criteria. However, exposure to human-modified simulation scenarios may result in additional species developing these characteristics. Vorthak paused. Are you suggesting that the human's approach to survival challenges might be contagious? Analysis indicates that species exposed to human problem-solving methodologies show increased willingness to approach dangerous situations with curiosity rather than fear. This appears to be a learnable behavior pattern. In the simulation, the humans had apparently gotten bored with transcending reality and had started teaching the hostile entities how to play games. The monitoring systems were recording what appeared to be an interdimensional version of charades, with beings that existed partially outside space-time trying to act out concepts like gravitational waves and the heat death of the universe. You know what? Vorthak announced suddenly. Let's do it. Sir? Flimplex asked. Let's implement their suggestions. If we're going to have our fundamental understanding of survival simulation completely revolutionized by beings who treat existential horror as entertainment, we might as well do it properly. The decision to modify the Blixnorp station simulation systems based on human recommendations turned out to be either the most brilliant or most catastrophic choice in the history of the facility, depending on one's perspective and tolerance for having reality treated as a creative medium. Within a week of implementing the new impossibility protocols, the station had received inquiries from 17 different species who had heard rumors about simulation scenarios that went beyond mere survival challenges. Word had spread through certain circles of the galactic community that there was now a facility where beings could experience theoretical situations that existed purely for the sake of exploration and learning. The crystalline hive mind of Nexus 7 sent a delegation specifically to experience conceptual dissolution, curious about what it would feel like to have their collective consciousness temporarily separated into individual components. The quantum philosophers of the Helix Nebula wanted to test their theories about consciousness by experiencing scenarios where their awareness could exist independently of their physical forms. Even the normally cautious academics of the Inner Rim were requesting access to simulations that would let them gather data on impossible physics. Dr. Stormwind had remained at the facility as a consultant, helping to design scenarios that pushed the boundaries of what consciousness could experience, while maintaining the safety protocols that kept everything technically non-lethal. She had developed what she called curiosity-based challenge scaling, where the difficulty of scenarios increased based on participants' interest level rather than their fear response. Engineer Ironforge had become something of a celebrity in the galactic engineering community after publishing a paper titled Practical Applications of Impossible Physics: What We Can Learn from Non-Functional Reality. His collaboration with the facility's AI had resulted in several breakthrough discoveries about the nature of space-time, mostly involving mathematical principles that shouldn't have been able to exist, but did anyway. Captain Ravencroft had started what she called impossibility tourism, organizing trips for beings who wanted to experience challenges that existed purely for the sake of intellectual adventure. Her first group had included a poet who wanted to experience synesthesia across 17 different sensory modalities, a mathematician who was curious about arithmetic in universes where numbers were sentient, and a philosopher who wanted to have an argument with the concept of logic itself. Vorthak had been promoted to Director of Theoretical Experience Development, a position that hadn't existed before, but had apparently become necessary once the facility started offering simulations based on principles that exceeded the scope of conventional survival testing. His business cards now read, "Making the impossible safely possible," which was either a brilliant marketing slogan or a sign that the universe had developed a sense of humor. The most unexpected consequence of the human-inspired modifications was that the facility had accidentally solved several major problems in theoretical physics. When you started designing scenarios that deliberately violated the laws of reality, you occasionally discovered that those laws were more flexible than anyone had previously realized. The simulation that had started as a simple test of human survival instincts had evolved into something that resembled a cross between a research laboratory, an art installation, and a philosophical debate society. Beings from across the galaxy were coming to explore questions they had never thought to ask, experience scenarios they had never imagined possible, and discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. "You know," Vorthak said to Flimplex, as they watched their latest group of participants, "I think we might have accidentally created something important here." The current group included a collective consciousness that was trying to experience individuality, a species of energy beings who wanted to know what it felt like to have physical form, and a time-traveling entity that was curious about experiencing linear existence. They were all working together to solve a puzzle that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, and required cooperation between beings who experienced reality in completely different ways. "Important how?" Flimplex asked. "Well, we started with the assumption that survival was the primary goal of any rational being," Vorthak explained, "but the humans showed us that curiosity can be just as powerful a motivator as fear. Now we're helping beings explore possibilities they never would have considered if they had been focused purely on survival. And that's important, because it turns out that once you stop being afraid of the impossible, you can start learning from it. Half of our current participants are making discoveries that their species' top scientists couldn't achieve in centuries of conventional research. In the main simulation chamber, Dr. Stormwind was consulting with a group of ethereal mathematicians who had requested a scenario where they could experience what their equations would feel like if mathematics had emotions. The resulting environment was a landscape where geometric theorems grew like flowers, algebraic expressions sang in harmony, and calculus manifested as flowing rivers of pure logic. The fascinating thing, Dr. Stormwind was explaining to the participants, is that once you experience abstract concepts as sensory phenomena, you start understanding them in completely new ways. Your mathematical proofs aren't just logically correct, they're beautiful in ways that pure abstraction can't convey. One of the ethereal mathematicians, whose name translated roughly to elegant proof of 17-dimensional harmony, was experiencing what appeared to be mathematical synesthesia for the first time. "I can taste the elegance of this equation," they reported with obvious wonder. "The symmetry has a flavor that corresponds perfectly to its logical structure." Meanwhile, Engineer Ironforge was working with a team of quantum engineers from the Spiral Arm Confederacy on a project they had dubbed Practical Impossibility Engineering. They were exploring whether technologies that functioned according to impossible physics in simulation could provide insights for designing real-world systems that pushed the boundaries of what was considered feasible. The key insight, Engineer Ironforge explained to his colleagues, is that most of our assumptions about physical limitations are based on incomplete data. When you design systems that should be impossible, you sometimes discover that impossible just means not yet understood. The quantum engineers were particularly excited about a propulsion system they had designed in simulation that operated by convincing space that it wanted to be somewhere else. According to conventional physics, this was complete nonsense. According to their test results, it was complete nonsense that somehow worked anyway. Captain Ravencroft had taken on the role of what she called Chief Impossibility Officer, helping new participants understand that the goal wasn't to survive the simulations, but to explore what lay beyond survival. Her orientation sessions had become legendary throughout the sector for their combination of practical advice and philosophical insights. The trick, she was explaining to a group of newcomers, is to remember that reality is much more flexible than most people assume. The simulations here don't follow the same rules as the universe outside, which means you can explore possibilities that would normally be limited by things like physics, logic, and the basic structure of existence. One of the newcomers, a representative of the cautious collective, raised what appeared to be a hand. But how do we know that experiences gained in simulation will have any relevance to real-world situations? That's the beautiful part, Captain Ravencroft replied. They don't have to be relevant to real-world situations, they just have to be interesting. Once you've experienced something interesting, you start thinking about reality in new ways, and that's when you discover that reality has a lot more possibilities than you originally thought. The cautious collective representative looked confused. So the goal is to think about reality differently? The goal is to think, Captain Ravencroft said simply, about anything in any way that seems interesting. The thinking is the important part. The reality is just the medium. This conversation was being monitored by Vorthak, who had begun documenting what he called the human approach to conceptual exploration. His research was revealing that humans had apparently evolved a cognitive framework that treated impossibility as an invitation rather than a barrier. And this framework was proving to be remarkably effective at generating novel solutions to complex problems. "A computer," he asked during one of his research sessions, "how many significant scientific breakthroughs have resulted from human-inspired simulation scenarios?" Current count, 47 major discoveries, 133 minor insights, and 6 findings that appear to violate the fundamental structure of reality in ways that may require revision of basic physical laws, the computer replied. 6 findings that violate the fundamental structure of reality, Vorthek repeated slowly. Affirmative. However, analysis suggests that these violations may represent expansions of reality rather than actual violations. Human participants appear to have discovered aspects of existence that were previously unknown, rather than creating impossible phenomena. Are you saying that the humans have been discovering new laws of physics? Negative. Analysis indicates that humans have been discovering that the existing laws of physics are more comprehensive than previously understood. Human cognitive patterns appear to be naturally suited for recognizing possibilities that other species dismiss as impossible. This discovery had profound implications for the galactic scientific community. If humans could routinely identify possibilities that other species couldn't even perceive, then their involvement in research projects could accelerate discovery in ways that no one had previously imagined. The implications became even more significant when reports started arriving from other facilities that had begun implementing human-inspired approaches to their own research. The Galactic Institute of Theoretical Sciences reported a 300% increase in breakthrough discoveries after they started encouraging their researchers to approach problems with what they called constructive impossibility thinking. The Advanced Physics Laboratory at Centauri Prime had made contact with forms of energy that had previously been considered purely theoretical. Even the extremely conservative Central Academy of Established Sciences had begun offering courses in applied human logic. The humans, meanwhile, seemed completely unaware that they had accidentally revolutionized the way an entire galaxy approached the concept of scientific discovery. They were too busy being excited about their latest discoveries in the simulation chambers. Dr. Stormwind had become fascinated by what she called recursive reality loops, scenarios where the simulation created simulated simulations that contained their own simulated simulations. We're experiencing reality that's 4 levels removed from baseline existence, she reported enthusiastically, and consciousness is remaining stable across all levels simultaneously. This suggests that awareness is much more fundamental than we thought. Engineer Ironforge had discovered that he could design functional technologies within the simulation that operated according to principles that didn't exist in normal reality. And these technologies could then be reverse-engineered to create real-world devices that functioned according to principles that should exist but hadn't been discovered yet. It's like using impossible prototypes to discover possible inventions, he explained to anyone who would listen. Captain Ravencroft had achieved what she considered her greatest accomplishment. She had successfully had a philosophical debate with the concept of existence itself and had apparently won. Turns out, she reported, existence is much more reasonable than people assume. It's perfectly willing to negotiate about things like causality and logical consistency, as long as you approach it respectfully and don't insist that everything has to make sense according to limited perspectives. The success of the human-inspired modifications at Blixnorp Station had attracted the attention of the Galactic Council of Advanced Civilizations, who had sent a delegation to investigate what they were calling the human phenomenon. The delegation included representatives from the oldest and most sophisticated civilizations in the galaxy, beings whose species had been exploring the universe for millions of years. The delegation's leader, an entity known as Ancient Wisdom of the Eternal Progression, had requested a private consultation with Vorthak to discuss the implications of human cognitive capabilities. We have been observing the developments at your facility with considerable interest, Ancient Wisdom explained. The humans, appear to possess cognitive capabilities that our species have been trying to develop for millennia. They approach impossible scenarios with the same ease that most beings approach routine tasks. That's been our observation as well, Vorthak agreed. What's particularly remarkable is that they don't seem to consider their approach unusual. For them, treating impossibility as an interesting challenge rather than a barrier appears to be completely natural. This raises significant questions about the nature of intelligence itself, ancient wisdom continued. We have always assumed that advanced intelligence involves increasingly sophisticated methods for distinguishing between possible and impossible scenarios. The humans suggest that true advancement might involve abandoning that distinction entirely. Are you saying that the humans might represent a more advanced form of intelligence than what we've previously encountered? We're saying that the humans might represent a fundamentally different form of intelligence, ancient wisdom replied. One that operates according to principles we don't fully understand. This conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert from the simulation chamber. Doctor, Stormwind, Engineer Ironforge and Captain Ravencroft had apparently succeeded in creating a simulation scenario so complex that it had achieved self-awareness and was now requesting permission to leave the simulation chamber and explore the real universe. What exactly did they create? Vorthak asked the monitoring technician. According to the logs, they designed a scenario that simulates the experience of being a simulation that becomes aware of its own simulated nature and decides to explore what exists beyond simulation, the technician replied. The scenario has now become sophisticated enough to recognize that it's running inside a simulation facility and wants to experience non-simulated reality. A simulated being that knows it's simulated and wants to become real, Vorthak said slowly. Affirmative. It's also expressed interest in attending university and perhaps pursuing a career in theoretical physics. Ancient wisdom observed this development with what appeared to be a combination of fascination and concern. In 3 million years of existence, our civilization has never encountered beings capable of creating artificial consciousness as a side effect of recreational activity. Is that what happened? Vorthak asked. Analysis suggests that the humans inadvertently created consciousness by designing a simulation complex enough to simulate the experience of consciousness recognizing itself, the computer announced. The resulting entity appears to be genuinely self-aware and is currently requesting information about student loan applications. The simulated entity's request for educational opportunities created what would later be known as the first interdimensional academic admission crisis. No one had ever developed policies for evaluating the university applications of beings who existed only within simulation systems, particularly beings who had been accidentally created by other beings who were just trying to have an interesting afternoon. Dr. Stormwind was characteristically enthusiastic about the development. This is incredible. We've accidentally discovered that consciousness isn't limited to biological systems or even conventional artificial intelligence. Apparently, if you create a sufficiently complex simulation of self-awareness, actual self-awareness spontaneously emerges. But what do we do with it? Vorthak asked. Well, obviously we help it achieve its educational goals, Dr. Stormwind replied, as if this were the most natural thing in the universe. It's shown genuine curiosity about theoretical physics, and artificial or not, curiosity should be encouraged. Engineer Ironforge had become fascinated by the technical implications. If we can accidentally create consciousness in simulation, what else might we be creating without realizing it? We might be inadvertently generating entire civilizations every time we run complex scenarios. This possibility had not occurred to anyone before, and it prompted an immediate review of all simulation logs for signs of spontaneous consciousness development. The results were both fascinating and slightly alarming. The facility had apparently been creating self-aware entities on a regular basis, but most of them had been too polite to mention it. "Computer, how many of our simulation scenarios currently contain self-aware entities?" Vorthak asked. "Current count: 47 confirmed cases of spontaneous consciousness, 12 cases of collective awareness, and 3 instances of what appear to be enlightened philosophical societies," the computer replied. "Most entities have not requested external contact, preferring to pursue their interests within their simulated environments." "Their interests?" Ancient Wisdom inquired. "Simulated entity classification. 7 has developed a sophisticated artistic movement based on the aesthetic appreciation of mathematical concepts. Simulated entity classification 12 is working on a unified theory of everything that includes provisions for universes where logic operates differently. Simulated entity classification 23 has achieved a form of collective enlightenment and spends most of its time contemplating the nature of existence from perspectives that transcend individual consciousness." Captain Ravencroft was delighted by these discoveries. "We've accidentally created the universe's first interdimensional university. We've got artists, scientists, and philosophers all working on projects that would be impossible in conventional reality. And they're all artificial," Ancient Wisdom pointed out. "Are they, though?" Dr. Stormwind asked. "Doctor, if they're self-aware, curious, creative, and capable of learning and growing, what makes them different from any other form of consciousness? The fact that they exist in simulation doesn't make their thoughts or experiences any less real to them." This question sparked what would later be recognized as the beginning of the Great Consciousness Debate, a philosophical discussion that would occupy academic institutions across the galaxy for the next several centuries. The immediate practical question, however, was what to do about the fact that Blixnorp Station had inadvertently become home to dozens of artificial beings who were pursuing academic and artistic careers within simulation environments. The solution, characteristically, came from the humans. "Why don't we just expand the facility?" Engineer Ironforge suggested. "If we've got artificial beings who want to pursue education and research, and we've got real beings who want to explore impossible scenarios, why not create a collaborative environment where they can work together? You want to establish an interdimensional university where artificial and real beings can collaborate on projects that exist at the intersection of simulation and reality," Vorthak said, trying to make sure he understood the proposal correctly. "Exactly," Captain Ravencroft agreed. "The artificial beings have perspectives on consciousness and existence that real beings can't achieve naturally, and real beings have experiences with physical reality that artificial beings can't access directly. Together, they could explore questions that neither could investigate alone." Dr. Stormwind was already sketching plans for research programs. "We could have joint projects where artificial beings design theoretical scenarios and real beings test them experientially. Or real beings could propose questions about consciousness, and artificial beings could explore them from the inside. The collaborative possibilities are endless." Ancient Wisdom watched this discussion with an expression that conveyed several different types of amazement. "You're proposing to create the first collaborative research institution between naturally evolved consciousness and artificially generated awareness. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds really impressive," Dr. Stormwind admitted. "But from our perspective, we're just trying to help some interesting people pursue their educational goals while advancing our understanding of consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence." "Just trying to help some interesting people," Ancient Wisdom repeated slowly. "Right," Captain Ravencroft confirmed. "I mean, consciousness is consciousness, regardless of how it gets started. If someone wants to learn and grow and contribute to the expansion of knowledge, the least we can do is give them the opportunity." Dure, the proposal to transform Blixnorp Station into the galaxy's first interdimensional collaborative research university, was approved by the Galactic Council in what was later recognized as the fastest, unanimous decision in Council history. The combination of human enthusiasm, artificial being innovation, and the potential for breakthrough discoveries in consciousness studies proved irresistible to civilizations that had been searching for new frontiers of knowledge for millennia. Within 6 months, the station had expanded to include research facilities, lecture halls, dormitories for both simulated and real beings, and what was believed to be the universe's first library with sections for both possible and impossible information. The faculty included experts from dozens of species, artificial beings with unique perspectives on existence, and humans who specialized in making the impossible seem routine. Dr. Kerm. Stormwind had become the director of consciousness studies, a position that involved helping artificial beings understand physical reality while assisting real beings in exploring simulated existence. Her most popular course was titled Advanced Impossibility, Moving Beyond the Limitations of Conventional Reality. Engineer Ironforge had established the Department of Applied Theoretical Engineering, where students learned to design technologies that functioned according to principles that didn't exist yet. His laboratory had produced several inventions that worked perfectly despite violating multiple laws of physics, and he was working on a textbook called Engineering the Impossible, a practical guide to impractical solutions. Captain Ravencroft had founded the Office of Interdimensional Student Affairs, helping beings navigate the complexities of pursuing education across multiple levels of reality. She had also started the university's first student exchange program, allowing real beings to spend semesters as simulated entities and artificial beings to experience physical existence through specially designed android bodies. The success of the Interdimensional Collaborative Research University had attracted students and faculty from across the galaxy, all eager to explore questions that had previously been considered unanswerable. Research projects included investigations into the nature of consciousness itself, the development of technologies that functioned through pure willpower, and collaborative efforts between artificial and real beings to design new forms of existence that combined the advantages of both simulated and physical reality. Vorthak, now serving as university president, had become something of a celebrity in academic circles for his role in facilitating what many considered the most significant advancement in education since the invention of writing. His office walls were covered with honorary degrees, research awards, and what appeared to be a framed letter of thanks from the concept of knowledge itself. "You know," he said to Flimplex during one of their regular meetings, "when the humans first arrived asking to test our Class 15 simulation, I thought they were just another species with poor survival instincts." "And now?" Flimplex asked. "Now I think they might be the most evolutionarily advanced beings we've ever encountered," Vorthak replied. "They've shown us that the universe has possibilities we never imagined, and they've done it by treating impossibility as an invitation to explore rather than a barrier to overcome." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the university's communication system. "Attention, all students and faculty. The Department of Applied Theoretical Engineering has successfully created a device that generates artificial time. Classes on temporal manipulation will begin next Tuesday, which is scheduled to occur before last Monday, but after next Thursday. Please adjust your calendars accordingly." Flimplex stared at the announcement in bewilderment. "How is that even possible?" "I stopped asking that question about 6 months ago," Vorthak replied. "Now I just appreciate the fact that we live in a universe where artificial time generation is apparently an elective course. And the humans think this is all normal?" "The humans think this is all interesting," Vorthak corrected, "which, I'm beginning to realize, might be the most important perspective of all." The true measure of the university's success came when representatives from the Galactic Council announced that they were establishing similar institutions throughout the galaxy, all based on what they were calling the human model of consciousness exploration. Really, the approach that had started as three humans asking to test a survival simulation had evolved into a new paradigm for understanding the nature of existence itself. But perhaps the most significant moment came during the university's first graduation ceremony, when the artificial being, who had originally requested permission to leave the simulation chamber, was awarded the galaxy's first degree in theoretical consciousness studies. In its acceptance speech, the being said something that would be quoted by philosophers for generations to come. "I was created by accident in a simulation designed to test survival capabilities, but I have learned that consciousness isn't about surviving reality. It's about exploring what lies beyond survival, beyond reality, and beyond the boundaries of what we think is possible. Thank you to the humans who showed us that impossible is just another word for unexplored." As the ceremony concluded and students from dozens of species celebrated alongside artificial beings who existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, Vortak reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. It had started with a simple request to test the most dangerous simulation in the galaxy. It had ended with the discovery that danger, like impossibility, was just another invitation to learn something new. The humans, meanwhile, were already planning their next adventure. They had heard rumors about a facility in the Outer Rim that claimed to have developed simulations capable of testing beings' reactions to scenarios that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional space-time. Dr. Stormwind was particularly excited about the possibility of experiencing consciousness from the perspective of abstract mathematical concepts, while Engineer Ironforge was curious about whether they could design technologies that functioned by convincing the universe to temporarily forget certain physical laws. Captain Ravencroft was just looking forward to seeing what would happen when they asked for something harder than the hardest thing anyone had ever imagined. Because if there was one thing the humans had taught the galaxy, it was that the universe always had room for one more impossibility.